I'm Daniel from Just Paid, and we have Agam as well from Just Paid. We've been doing this podcast for probably about a year now, Agam, I would say, give or take. So, interviewing really amazing founders in the fintech space, in the AI space, or just technology space in general. Why don't we kick things off with, what your company does first and who you are, and then, we'll kind of go into like just a series of questions.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. Yeah, happy to start with an intro. So I'm Taylor, co-founder and CEO at Metal. We started the company actually at the start of last year out of YC. Happy to provide some more context on the sort of origin story of the company, but the product today, we really work explicitly with PE and VC funds with a focus on their deal and portfolio teams. And from a very high level, Metal as an application helps accelerate both deal and portfolio team workflows, helping them consume data from private company document sets, surfacing insights faster, and then ultimately providing tools for analysis, which helps those teams make better investment decisions.
What made you get into this, Taylor? Like, what was it about this particular industry that you wanted to like tackle, when building a company?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think really, if you understand the history of the company and how we got to sort of where we are today, not only provide some color on that, but also how we view the space, the technology, and how it can relate to funds in particular. So, just a bit more background on myself and the founding team. We all come from a technology background, right? We spent individually 10 plus years in enterprise SaaS. Most of our experience, for that matter, has been on the data and the infrastructure side of things. So myself actually, before Metal was in product, my two co-founders on the engineering side of things, we've spent time building CRMs together. Prior to that, James, my other co-founder, was on the ML infrastructure team at Spotify, did a stint at Carta. Sergio spent some time on the serverless team at Datadog. So all very, very sort of data and infrastructure heavy roles. And when we started the company, when we initially launched this out of YC, if you wind back a bit, this was in January of 2023. This was right at the moment, of course, when GPT was really starting to take off. The world was being introduced to LLMs. From our perspective, the first thing that we thought of was, look, this technology is incredible. All of the hype is very warranted, but as an application developer, these tools are only as good as the data that they can interact with. So, the first thing we thought of is, okay, well, let's empower developers to build best-in-class LLM applications, and we'll start with helping them get their data into the stack, right? So, Metal's very first product was actually sort of this general purpose infrastructure pipeline, which could take in both structured and unstructured data as a managed service. We would pull that data in, transform it, extract information from it, and store it in a way that it could then be queried by LLMs. This was industry agnostic. So, this was also when a lot of different teams across many industries were just starting to get into the field, right? And understanding how can I use this technology today? Super, super experimental. And for that matter, I think the market is still very much in an experimental mode, although it's certainly progressed over the last year and a half. And I'd say, at about the halfway point of last year, we started to get an understanding of, the developer platform approach is very interesting, but this technology is so new. We were working with pretty advanced development teams across a wide array of industries. And most of the conversations, we initially thought that they would come with these, sort of ready to go use cases that we could help enable with a developer platform. And what we realized is that, a lot of the time we're spending is actually just helping them understand the technology itself, which would change week to week, right? You'd have some new advancements, some new models, some new framework come out. So it was really hard to keep up. And then that also made us look at the business and say, well, what are sort of the killer apps and use cases that we're enabling? What is the ultimate sort of gettable value that Metal can provide? And I think, that's what ultimately led us to look at the verticals that we were working with and pick one for a focus. And, very early on, we got pulled into working with funds. One of our oldest customers, is a pretty mature fund, been in PE for about 30 to 40 years. And, these teams were just working with, for example, in the diligence process, a massive amount of unstructured and structured data under a tight timeline, right? So if you're trying to understand a company, It's going to be anything from call transcripts, board decks, financials, of course, third party research, and distilling all this information down and getting to a consensus and getting to position on a company is really, really laborious work. It's expensive work because these analysts and deal teams are typically paid pretty well. And it can really add up. So, that was one of the first sort of light bulbs for us, is that we saw, even just with a very rudimentary implementation of Metal, which is just take some basic information, vectorize it, make it queryable by LLMs, they were getting a ton of time back. So I think, the second half of the year, we really started to narrow that focus, working more and more with funds. We started to then tune our data infrastructure to specifically work with company documents. So, very opinionated extraction of a financial statement versus a call transcript versus a board deck, and getting just higher quality data into the system, which they could then interact with. And then fast forwarding a bit to January of this year, we effectively relaunched the company as a vertical SaaS, specifically for private equity and venture, with, again, that focus on deal and portfolio teams.
So just to understand, like when a company gets acquired, you said things are expensive. I'm assuming it's the legal costs. I'm assuming there's people hired to like literally review everything in the company. I'm assuming it's just, depending on the size of the company, I'm sure that gets more and more expensive. If it's like $1 billion deal, there's probably 20 lawyers on at least on the deal. But I guess what you're doing is you're consolidating all of the deal, like have like a deal room, correct? So it's like essentially all the documents, and you scour those. I'm trying to recreate like what
Yep.
you're saying. You scour all of those. AI understands that. You record all of the recordings of like the interviews and the process, and you create a summary deck for the acquirer to understand what's happening better.
Yeah, in a way. So I'd say, a good way to understand it is just imagine, a data room, right? You're working on a deal team. You just get access to a data room from a sell side advisor. And very quickly, you have to start combing through these files, prioritizing the right ones that help your team answer sort of these top line questions, right? And this is a very iterative process throughout the diligence process itself, right? So you'll have an initial set of questions. They'll tend to be more top line, like, what's the last 12 months of revenue, looking at some financial metrics, what's their competitive positioning, what's the management background. Again, all of this is made up of both structured and unstructured data. When you can throw any of those documents into Metal, we extract the important stuff from them. So, taking a call transcript, for example, if you upload that to Metal, we'll process it, we'll process all of the text. So we'll pull out things like, the speaker, direct quotes, the sentiment of the call, if any financial metrics are mentioned. All of that is then stored in our system, which can be queried. So you can have a chat interface with that call transcript. You could search through it. You could also generate sort of long-form reports over it. And we're just talking about in the context of one file, but the reality is in the context of a deal, it's going to be many, many files, right? And deal teams are typically going to be split up and looking at certain sections of the business to get this sort of, aggregated view. And that there's that mix of, again, both qualitative and quantitative data that helps them get that view, but just takes a lot of time to read through. So just getting even into the efficiency gains, in our system, for example, you could upload 100 call transcripts, right? And then ask Metal to produce a summary analysis, looking for consensus among speakers, looking for contradictions. You could also compare those call transcripts to the company's financials. So you could say, management is saying this, and they have a positive sentiment, yet their financial metrics in the last 12 months equals this. And there's clearly a schism here. And I think that's one of the really interesting applications for AI in this space, is that we can marry both the structured and unstructured data and then programmatically run an analysis over it using the capabilities of LLMs. And it just greatly, greatly accelerates how fast these teams can move during a diligence process. And just one more piece of color there is, these diligence processes are obviously not done in a vacuum. One PE fund, if they're evaluating a company, that company is also shopping itself to several other funds. So there is a time constraint. You want to get the right information, you want to get the right insights. You of course don't want to rush it and make a bad decision. But at the same time, you don't want to take forever because somebody else is going to move along and jump in on that deal. So, to us also from a software perspective, we love that challenge because it has to both be fast and accurate. The bar is very, very high. And I think that's a bit unique to finance, right? Where you're working with sensitive data, the numbers have to be right. So from a technology perspective, it's a great challenge and one that we've really enjoyed building for.
And the
That's really interesting. So I just want to know, like, how do you come up with the name Metal? Does it relate to anything? Just a backstory on that.
I love that question. We get it more often than you think. I wish I had a more elaborate story. The reality is we like the music. And Sergio and I, my other co-founder, were sort of sitting in his backyard one day and we were mulling over what we should call the company. I don't remember what sort of music we were listening to, but I know it was metal. And we just sort of said, why not? Bought the domain on the spot. And yeah, we like the name. Just kind of rolled with it.
some people get great names. I feel like it's a great name. You're able to get metal.ai, which is probably one of the best domains out there, which is insanely good.
We're pretty happy about it. Yeah. Appreciate that, guys.
Just a little details here. It says that I was reading some statistics on PE firms in the US, and it's going to, it's $460 billion industry right now. It's going to grow to a $765 billion industry in the next few years, growing 11%, which is amazing. It's a massive like market. So your market is actually huge. What I find interesting is, like, I guess the PE market, not everybody knows what that quite is. Maybe you could describe, I know what the PE market is, but maybe you could describe what the PE market is, your like market you're going after is, and who they are, just to the
Yeah.
audience, because some people may know what venture capitalists are. I think PE is kind of different than that. It's a different.
Yeah. Well, I think for us, it's still early days, right? In servicing both venture and private equity. I think sort of the common thread for us is, where you're working with private company data sets. And I think, a big piece of that, if you want to understand what teams we really focus on, private company data sets are, by definition, private, right? They're not available to public consumers. Often these funds will get into, an NDA just to even get access to this type of data. So how do you get this information into the world of LLMs? For teams that we work with, we found ourselves working with sort of middle to upper middle market funds. So call it anywhere from like 1 to 2 billion under management up to 30 to 40. And I think that's, we find some overlaps there because of the volume of data, like the diligence, if it's a later stage investment cycle, is going to be a bit more involved than, let's call it, like early stage investing or pre-seed investing. If you're conducting diligence on a pre-seed or seed stage company, it's often at the idea stage. It might be a pitch deck or two and some conversations with the founders. In our case, we're looking at more mature businesses that are sort of later on in their lifespan. So on the VC side, Series A, B, and up. For private equity, these are established businesses that have been around for some time. And have, historical financials, for example, to reference. So there's just much, much more data to parse through. And that's really where I think we can address the pain a bit more acutely, because it's a volume problem, right? You can only read so many call transcripts in a day. You can only digest so many financial statements in a day, and helping distill that down and finding the signals of the noise. That's really where I think we found the most value. So sort of in that middle to upper middle market range.
Just want to know about, like, how do you got your first customer? I mean, first customer is a really emotional as well as a milestone thing for a startup. And how did you went through it? And I think this industry is super scrutinized as well as very much regulated. So why would any company would try a new company to analyze their data? And was it really tough? Was it through some particular references? I would like to take it.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, there's always a benefit of timing, right, as a startup. And I think, we didn't draw this up intentionally, but, when we launched the company, it was right at the moment when LLMs took off, right? And I think there was such a fervor, and still is, in the market for trying to understand how this technology can work for individual businesses. And I think also for us, as when we started as a developer platform, a lot of what we're trying to do is understand like what are sort of the killer apps and use cases that this technology can enable. So we've always taken a really high touch partnership approach to working with our customers to learn their workflows, right? To help us understand, what are your current processes today? What are the most time consuming and the most expensive? And then can we apply this technology to those workflows to out of the gate get you that time back? And then, even further than that, discovering insights in your data that you would have missed otherwise. So, I'd say last year there was a tremendous amount of just inbound interest, and even across many industries. And then within the fund sector itself, I'd say, PE and financial services in general, historically have not always moved super fast with certain technologies. But in this case, I think the pull is very real because some of the applications are obvious, right? And it's always, how much time we're spending on a certain task. And you can see LLMs reducing these things by an order of magnitude. So out of the gate, I think it really has helped people just kickstart their need to explore this technology, see how it could be used. And then when we worked with these funds early on, that's how we've always presented ourselves, which is true, right? We view ourselves as technology partners. When we decided to go after the fund vertical, we decided we're going to bring this technology to the vertical, but we're going to work very closely with our customers to map the software to how their teams work. So that's really how it's been going so far. Say for every new customer we bring on, whether it's a pilot or a longer term deal, we still have that same type of relationship. I think for us, again, in these early days, making sure that the product maps their workflows is the most important thing. So we very much have a strategy of depth over breadth right now. There's really so much to build also because, these applications don't have references, right? There's no sort of known 10-year-old LLM provider for private equity or venture. So it's a very creative endeavor. And then again, recognizing ourselves as technology partners, this is why we have to work super closely with our funds. So the long answer there, but how we secure these early customers of ours, there's just that approach, right? We meet at least weekly, even with our original customers from last year, on sites, just really making sure that this product is going to meet their high bar. Again, going back to that speed and accuracy I mentioned earlier. And that's the focus right now.
One question I have for you is around, I guess, Y Combinator. Changing topics really quickly. Me and you were in the same batch. I did Y Combinator twice, but the second time I did it, everyone I talked to mentioned it was a really unique experience in the sense like we were able to go to Curio. Most people don't know what Curio is. Like Gary Tan was becoming CEO like in our batch, so he was really taking over to like do what he's doing now. Maybe like for me, I thought it was so fun to have Curio and the way that they were running it for that one batch. Maybe you could just talk through like it was your first time through YC. You probably were like drinking through a fire hose of like just the information that they were pouring at you. Like what was it like for you to go through YC?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in some, it was amazing. It was honestly a really transformative experience. For myself and for a lot of other people in the technology industry, a lot of our introduction to the space was reading Paul Graham essays, right? So it's always been this, YC has been this huge entity that I revere. And when we even applied to it, I kind of, Sergio, my co-founder, recommended it. And I said, I don't think so. We're never going to get in. We're no Airbnb. We're no Dropbox. And it shows how little I knew about the program, right? And what their thesis is. So just a quick kind of run through of what our experience was. And hopefully for anyone listening, this could also be some unsolicited advice for if you're going through the program or even applying. We actually got in with a very different idea. We initially had this idea for like a product feedback tool where, within a SaaS org, there's all this unstructured data that has, valuable product feedback and insights in it. It could be across sales calls, CX notes, what have you. And we're going to build these ingestion pipelines that help product teams ultimately make better decisions. We invalidated that idea, I think, within 3 weeks of joining the program. And that kind of shows, I think, the strength of YC is that the group partners really asked us some hard questions for us to ask of ourselves in the business, and we just determined it wasn't viable. I think the one good thing about that is how quickly we decided. But then, we were 3 weeks into the program. We had just scrapped this idea that we were working on sort of nights and weekends, and we had nothing. And that was an uncomfortable position for us. And we went through this sort of mini pivot hell. We tried a lot of different ideas. We kind of had this joke that YC would come calling and say that the funding was rescinded. But we sort of just got through that. And eventually we landed on that, the initial launch for Metal, right, which was the infrastructure platform. I'd say during the program itself, this is some of the advice I'd give. We were actually a little hesitant to kind of get out there and just meet more people during the Curio events, for example, those happy hours, because we felt a bit sheepish that we didn't have this Watchnet idea and that we weren't like crushing it yet, right? We just had such a high bar, and looking back, it's so funny because the product and the idea at that point was like weeks old. So we kind of go to Curio and we'd be like hanging out in the corner a bit. We talk to a couple of people, and then we say, let's go back to the Airbnb and just do some more work. So if I had to do it all over again, I would have just leaned into the fact that we were starting at that point, because so many other founders were at that point too, even some prior to that. And that's very normal, but for us, we didn't have a lot of confidence in it. So it's a lot more fun going back to YC events now because we've got a lot more to talk about. But if I were to do it again, that's the advice I'd give myself.
Yeah, there is this, I would say, confidence thing in YC where some people, they either get out there and they're, networking with everyone, or they feel like insignificant and like unsure, but that's normal. I think that's totally normal. Like what you were experiencing, I think probably at least 50 other founders are feeling, honestly, like at the same time. So I mean, I guess advice for other people that like get into the program, you're saying like, get out there and just talk regardless of how you're feeling about it. You don't hide in the corner.
Yeah.
I guess is what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that's also, it aligns with YC's thesis, which is, I wasn't as familiar with until we got into the program, which is, they invest in what they think are good founders, right? And, part of being a good founder is certainly getting out of the building. It's talking to customers, users, just getting out there in general. You're not going to really solve many problems by just living in front of a whiteboard and ideating all day. You have to get out there. And I think, it's one of the other things I've learned from it is starting a company and starting a software company in particular. So much of it is just doing it and doing it every day, piece by piece, and sticking with it, right? It's just more at bats sort of opens up the chance of a good opportunity or a good insight. And it's that repetition and that dedication to finding the truth in either the product that you're trying to build or the market you're trying to serve. Because that's ultimately what you're after, right? If you want to build something that people want, you have to know about those people. You have to know who they are, what their sort of like dislikes are, of course, their jobs, their workflows, and you need to talk to them to understand that. You can't read case studies about a vertical and learn everything about it. Even I'll say when we have customer on-sites, there's so much interesting stuff that you don't pick up on the Zoom, right? It's a lot of the unspoken pieces, right? Even the way that people interact, the body language, the tone, things that are really hard to pick up virtually. When you're on site and you're interacting with your customers, there's just all this stuff you notice that you would never have noticed before. And again, that just gets back to the function of getting out of the building.
Got it. Really, really, really good advice. Agam, I'll let you take the next question.
I know it's gonna be like a very hectic thing for any founders to start a software company. For you, just getting into personal stuff, like how do you keep yourself moving forward, keep your motivation up, and what do you do to keep yourself up for the challenge every time you encounter?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's a couple of pieces of advice there. I'd say, for one, the list of things you should be doing is basically infinite, right? So it's not even about necessarily compiling the list. It's really about prioritizing, right? And sort of one of the filters I always ask myself every morning is, what is the single most important thing I could do for the company today? And on the scale of a day, that could be a very small thing, right? But if you do that every single day and you try to prioritize what you think is the most important, that can really add up over time. And it also, there's that feeling of momentum. If anyone listening here is, familiar with like product management and how products are broken down and built, you're always breaking down the big sort of task into many, many small tasks. And it's the same principle with company building, right? So asking yourself, out of my infinite list, what is the most important 1 to 3 things you could do during the day? And then when you achieve those every single day, you just have this feeling of progress. So those little wins, those feelings of momentum, they really help, right? Because it does make you feel like you're going somewhere. Now that said, there are definitely going to be days where you feel like things are going backwards, right? Like there's always the highs and the lows. I'd say for anyone who has co-founders, this is a great use of co-founders, right? There's 3 of us, my co-founders and I. We also have the really good fortune of being close friends before we started this company. So, we work very well together. We know how we work. And we know that the emotions of what we're doing is part of how we work. So if one of us is sort of feeling down for whatever reason, right, that's when you should lean on your co-founders. In that sense, people compare co-founders to married couples. I think there's a lot of truth to that. And you bring your problems to your partner in that sense and say, look, this is what I'm going through. Like, help me see it how you see it and you get another perspective. And that's one other piece I'd say, right? I think there's one sort of issue I take with the industry as a whole is that there's this sort of myth of the founder that the single founder can put everything on their back and, bring the company to, a resounding success. I think while in a lot of cases, the stories and the media around it and successful founders might point to that or might make you think that companies are nothing more than groups of people. They're hardworking, very smart people, and you absolutely cannot do these things alone. Part of being a good founding team is putting those right pieces into place and making sure they're working on things that they care about that benefit the company. So asking for help, that even goes back to my advice around being in YC and being at those Curio events. We didn't ask for as much help in those events, and I kind of wish we did. So I'd say that's another big part of it.
Did you see, I guess, a question for you, the number of co-founders? You guys have 3. My new startup has 3 co-founders. Why 3? Why not 2? Why not do it on your own? Why didn't you just try this on your own when you first started?
Yeah, so I think for us, in our case, right, it's a bit of a balanced team, right? So my background before I was in product, actually, I started my career in sales. So moving from sales into product, I got experience selling, which is really important for a startup, but then also have the technical acumen and can understand how to put products together. And then for Sergio and James, both on the technical side, Sergio has much more of a sort of architectural mind, focuses much more on the back-end systems of the product, and looks at things from that perspective. James is very focused on the front-end side of things, user experience, making sure that the app is holistic and ties together. And these are sort of generalizations, right? Obviously, we all have overlaps, but I think, the 3 of us can sort of tend to those different areas of the business as primary focus points, but of course have to work together to sort of join everything to make sure we're all heading in the right direction at the same pace. And we just, I think one of the biggest things there, I can't undersell it enough, is we work very well together. Again, we were friends before this, and we take for granted how smoothly things are with us as co-founders. We've for sure encountered tricky questions, problems, and issues. And as a team, I'd say that's the single thread that always gets us past it to the next point.
So going back a little bit, in your history, it said you started in Pittsburgh as, I guess, a philosophy major.
It did.
What's funny is actually Paul Graham was a philosophy major. I don't know if you knew that, the founder of Y Combinator.
Yeah.
So there is a theme. There's a theme of some founders being philosophy majors.
Yeah.
Was it the critical thinking? Was it a rebellion against what society said you should be doing? Was it academia wasn't the right path? There's so many different questions. And when
Right.
when I look at Paul Graham, I had those same questions, but you took that same path, which was philosophy, and then kind of broke away, to do technology. Very similar path as the founder of Y Combinator. Why do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there was I don't even remember who gave me this advice, but I remember it was right before I was heading off to college, and I was talking. This person was probably in their 50s or so, and I asked, "Hey, do you have any advice? Right? What should I study? What should I focus on?" And it stuck out to me. He just said, study what you find interesting, right? Like college is this unique time where, if you get into a job or a career and you're staying in that career for most of your adult life, that's going to be your focus, right? You're sort of, the aperture narrows a bit. And college is this very interesting time where you can broaden that by design. So I just found philosophy interesting. I think the reason why is, it's very much an exercise in how to think critically. I never took philosophy as literal. I think in some cases you'll work with people on the philosophy side of things who sort of almost view it as a math equation. And for me, it's like, no, it's very fuzzy here. And the idea is to explore and challenge convention. But those thought frameworks and processes to just like pull back, look at something a bit more objectively, try to take a different angle at it just as a thought exercise is very, very useful in technology. And I'd say, especially now for what we're doing, right? Again, there's very few reference points in the world of LLMs in this current wave of software, right? So in my whole career, a lot of my career prior to this was actually spent in CRM, which is a very known category, right? If you were to start a CRM company today, there's sort of like a hit list of things that people would expect, table stakes. That is not really the case in our vertical and with our technology. So it's much more of a creative effort. And I'd say that type of thinking is really useful, right? Because there aren't any reference points. So you just got to get a bit creative there. And philosophy, I think, was very helpful for that.
Why not stay in Pittsburgh where you did philosophy? Was it right? Is that where you were?
Yeah. No, it was. So yeah, actually, when I was in college, I'm just memory lane. When I was in college, I actually thought I was going to be a lawyer. And by thought, I mean I didn't think much about it. So kind of got up to the end of my college career, and then I started studying for the LSAT. And in the middle of studying for the LSAT, I immediately realized I did not want to be a lawyer. Nothing disparaging against lawyers. I was raised by an attorney, but it just wasn't for me. And I just like started to look around. Well, what do I do now? And through really good fortune, I connected to a mentor who has spent years and years in the space, and just kind of gave me a nudge and said, "Hey, I think you might be interested in this." So I started consuming everything I could about the industry, about just the space in general. I read every article in TechCrunch, read all of PG's essays, just up and down, trying to get really deep into it. And part of the reason was that I really just fell in love with it. I fell in love with the mix of both creativity, design, business, value creation, and all these things, and speed that technology affords. And I actually started, briefly, I started a company out of college with a couple of friends of mine as well. I think that the big experience there was that I had a lot to learn. So it was a good experience. We had this product running. It was sort of like this, it was in the local social mobile days. So it's sort of in that category. Lasted about 10, 11 months. And when it wound down, I decided, look, what I really want is, this was great hands-on learning. I'm a person who learns by doing. So I want to go to sort of ground zero, right? And I just packed my stuff up and drove to San Francisco. When I got to San Francisco, I knew two friends from college there at the time who very graciously let me sleep on their couch. And I just started kind of poking around and looking for work. And I initially was pulled into the product side of things because I knew I wanted to start a company again. I said, look, I want to get product experience so I can round out the technical skill set to actually build these products and work with technical teams. I had zero product management experience. I basically just started this app, which was almost a project more than a company. And so I ended up getting a sales job. And, at first I was kind of disappointed by that. I said, I really want to be product and now I'm in sales. Looking back, I would not have done anything differently. The skills that you learn in sales are so universally transferable that, I use them every single day, of course, for the company itself. But just a massive help to the start of my career. And then also taking that experience and moving into product, understanding the revenue side of the house, understanding, the sales process, sort of the nuances there of getting customers in the door and keeping them happy. Just critical to company building. And as a founder, all three of us are always engaged in sales. So the skill set was tremendous. And then from there, just to round that out, I was in San Francisco for about 4 or 5 years, transitioned into product towards the middle to end part of that stint. And then I moved to New York in 2019, if I'm not dating myself correctly, or yes, 2019. Yeah, and then I joined a company called Customer, which is a CRM company here in New York, on the product side of things. Yeah, and then I've been here ever since.
Nice. I know Agam's in New York also. He goes back and forth to New York. Like, what's the good, the bad, the ugly of San Francisco, Pittsburgh, or New York? I'm sure they all have like pros and cons, like to each. I'm sure Agam, you could jump in and ask questions here too, because he lived in New York and San Francisco.
Yeah, yeah. I was in New York for 3 years. I did my college there. I graduated from New York University.
Amazing.
Since then, after that, I moved to the Bay Area. I was there for a good 4 months, and then again back to New York, then India, and then New York, back and forth.
Yeah, no, that's a lot of miles, and that's great. I think you might echo some of this sentiment, but yeah, I think I actually really value having spent time in both, right? So in San Francisco, I mean, it's sort of the epicenter in a lot of ways, and a lot of the thinking, the frameworks, YC, of course, all coming out of the Bay Area. So almost like a classical education in startups is what you'll get with San Francisco. In New York, I think the one thing that I like about New York compared to SF is that there's much more industrial diversity in New York. SF is very, very tech heavy, understandably. But from a product building perspective, that industrial diversity helps you get a lot of different perspectives of, if you're talking about a problem to somebody who doesn't have any background in technology, they might come to you with a problem or with a solution that is not grounded in technology at all. But as a technologist, it gives you the opportunity to say, well, could we productize that? Could we build a solution for that? Whereas in SF, that was a bit harder to come by, right? Because it's so tech heavy. But the depth of knowledge in San Francisco is almost, really second to none. So in terms of like technical skills and capabilities, just raw horsepower out of the Bay Area, really, really phenomenal. I'd say in terms of, the way that business models are thought of, and look, these are all sweeping generalizations, right? There's going to be exceptions to these for sure. But New York in some ways can be a bit more, what's the word? Like, I don't want to say like practical, but like, you're sort of thinking about, how can we, make this a repeatable business a little bit quicker and sort of more tightly. And in San Francisco, you can be a bit more ambitious. Now there's pros and cons to both of that type of thinking, but my response is it should not be one or the other. You should really have both on your mind. But living in both environments sort of got me that. I mean, San Francisco's like very, very ambitious thinking is responsible for some of the most important technological innovations, of our time. And New York, I think really helped in my mind, at least, try to operationalize that a bit better. And I think also, I'd say this all with a grain of salt because it was also at a point in my career where I had a bit more experience and started to back in a lot of the sort of larger technology concepts and product building concepts, in my career and being a bit more hands-on with that before we started the company.
Interesting pace on which the industry is moving, LLMs, generative AI, Google, OpenAI, the AI battle going on, Apple jumping in with OpenAI. It's pretty interesting space in terms of consumer side, but in terms of business side, there are very interesting startups coming out. And in terms of like industry specific in fintech and financial services, I feel there's a lot of potential where a lot of processes can be automated or made quicker as well as more efficient through AI. Just to know from your perspective as an AI founder, where do you see this industry going towards, and what kind of innovative products do you see in specific verticals, like where can be an innovation or that where can be a next NVIDIA or Google building up?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think, just to speak to our vertical a bit, I think one of the ways that we always think about it is, we're still very much in the early days. And, one of the first things that you can get as a fund are efficiency gains, right? I think always a really good example is call transcripts, right? They're sort of almost bread and butter for LLMs to be served for a financial services use case. And just removing the manual time that it would require to read through a transcript, take your notes down, et cetera, processing that through an LLM. That said, I think if you fast forward a year from now, any PE and VC fund is going to have at least part of their process either run by or really greatly accelerated by AI tooling. And that's sort of going to be table stakes, right? So I think the winners in this market are going to be the ones that can use the technology to actually uncover novel insights, right? Like, what can AI help a fund discover in a private company data set that if they had an army of analysts and unlimited time, they might still miss, right? Like, how can you use capabilities that can uncover just new discoveries and data? And that's where I think really the partnership model is so important to us, because you don't get that level of detail unless you work side by side with these customers. It's also how we sort of frame our product development as well. So I think, just sort of zooming out to the broader market, I think there will likely be a fair amount of winners in vertical SaaS. I think, to us, the LLM it's basically a refactor of software development as a whole, right? Like, if you're going to start on a new software product today, to ignore an LLM would be interesting. I think you should probably consider using one, because they can just do so much. They open up such a new class of data and abilities for software. So I think successful companies are going to start up in all these verticals who basically just take the technology to a vertical, apply it to painful workflows that are called pre-LLM, and then they can immediately get massive efficiency gains, uncover new insights, all that sort of thing. And of course, we hope to be one of them at Metal within funds. But I would expect to see that across the board, because if you sort of use that refactor analogy, it's multiple industries refactoring their toolkits around LLMs. And this is actually where I think startups have a really great advantage right now versus incumbents. If you're working as a legacy service provider and you have your product is built before LLMs are mainstream, you now have to maintain that product, keep those current customers happy, and you have to have some sort of R&D skunkworks type of department who's trying to figure out how we can use this technology, and then the added step of how do we integrate it into our existing platform. Whereas startups, blank slate, they're just starting with the problems in the technology itself, and for those that can execute very, very well, I think those companies will be massively successful.
So you're saying these tools will complement people versus take over their jobs completely. That's kind of like the underlying thing I'm hearing. It's not going to replace all of the analysts and replace all of the people that are looking at it, all of the data. You're saying it's more a complementary product.
Yeah. In my view, yes. And ultimately, if you want to simplify it for funds, these decisions, right? If you can get to an analysis, and let's say, you can use Metal to get, comparable, if not better analysis than what, a lot of analysts would manually be putting together. The decisions are still going to be on the fund, right? Which is going to be reliant on experience and, know-how about, what companies they like to invest in. And it's not a silver bullet, right? Like, it's an assistant. It helps you get to some of those insights faster. But at the end of the day, everyone's always going to be working with imperfect data, right? There's going to be things that you don't see and things that you don't plan for. I mean, take COVID, for example, right? No one had that in their model. Things happen. So at the end of the day, the work is still subjective. The evaluations to invest and go on with companies is still subjective. For us, it's just helping you get there faster. But no, I don't advocate for replacing analysts with an autonomous assistant. You need to check the work. And I think that's a big part of what our product is about too, is establishing trust, right? Because a lot of people, still trying to get their heads around AI and, what is this black box? Where is my data being sent? How do I know this isn't a hallucination? So we actually build those product mechanisms directly into the application. So when you upload information to Metal that is processed, and then deal teams can query or portfolio teams can query, any output that we generate is always attributable to a source, which is stored in Metal. So they can point back to the specific table, for example, that a metric was pulled from, or a specific quote from a transcript that it was pulled from. So having that in your sort of view in the application itself. And then the other half of what we do for trust is actually programmatic evaluations. So we internally evaluate every single output that Metal generates. We evaluate model performance across a wide array of tasks. And we feed that back into the product and expose confidence intervals to users so they understand that, hey, while we got you this output, we noticed X, Y, and Z contradictions you might want to check into the source documents as a result. And I think that in and of itself is a great example of why humans must be kept in the loop here, because if you remove them, then you're just going to take the output with no correction. And in the case of funds making decisions and moving quite a bit of money around, that's not really viable.
I mean, as you were talking, I was thinking about how the experience for the executive team or the founders will become better because time kills deals, I guess, sometimes. And sometimes if a investor is dragging their feet and they're scared, having this type of tool will make them feel more confident in their deal decisions. And, I think there's also deals that just kind of people lose because the deal is so hot and they don't have all of the data and they can't make the decision fast enough. Like when Uber, I'm sure, was raising funds, it was so competitive at all of the time, because the company was growing at such a fast pace that someone might have access to the deal, but if you don't move quick, you're going to lose out. So how are you going to put your team on to like do the analysis so fast? So having a tool like yours will basically allow, in the future, I'm seeing it like deal flow to be more fast and more confident, and it helps the entrepreneurs, it helps the deal flow, the PE and VC funds just make them decision faster, which is honestly better for the industry. It gives more clarity, like to the investor or the acquirer, like very, very, and people need that. I mean, I see it because deals are happening all the time. PE funds are investing, VCs are investing, but
no, I totally agree. And I mean, if you think about sort of the inefficiencies of manually screening every inbound deal, right? So if you're at a PE fund, you get a SIM, you get a prospectus, someone has to comb through that. They have to manually pull out the numbers. They have to plot that somewhere. They have to make a case, to proceed or to pass on it. But it's just, it's a funnel, right? Every single new inbound opportunity, presents a block of work and hours that you're going to have to commit. I'm just using this as an example because one of the things that, we do with Metal is, customers of ours use it for really, really accelerated deal screening. So you can process an inbound deal, a data room, third-party research, what have you, in Metal, and then you can run some analysis over that, and you can compare that to historic deals that either went well or did not go well, which helps you get bad deals out of the pipeline sooner, helps you jump on good deals faster, and just a better allocation of human capital there because you're putting these very, very smart people, hardworking people onto the right tasks versus cleaning out a bunch of gunk, right, that you never would have proceeded with anyway, but you have to manually get through that data to figure it out, which can really, really add up depending on how many deals you take in over a month.
Just to wrap it up, I just want to know, like, or just for the audience, like, anyone willing to start a company in financial services, AI, LLMs, as per your experience so far, things like do's, don'ts, or something which will be really helpful, something which you should like take care of or know before you jump into it. Like there are professionals who want to jump from their work and they want to get into a startup world, try their hands in entrepreneurship. Any advice, any parting statement?
Yes. I would say especially now with AI, right? There's sort of this almost like a paradox of choice with AI where it can do everything. And if you try to have it do everything, it's not going to do much, right? So this adage, even applies to companies before AI, but, try to focus on one thing that you have validated is painful, that people are willing to pay for, and do that one thing really, really well, right? There's that quote, I think, solving one problem really well is better than solving 100 sort of so-so. That's a great place to start too, because as a team, if you take on, every single customer request and you're just starting out and you're trying to service financial services and using AI to meet all of these use cases, you're going to have all of this context switching that's going to sort of pull you all over the place, and the product is not going to have the depth to solve at least one problem very, very well. So, if I were even to give some advice, right, if you don't know, if you want to get into building AI products for funds, for financial services, don't even start coding. Just go talk to people, figure out, talk to me about your process, give me your day-to-day, where do you spend the most time, what drives you crazy, what keeps you up at night, and just get an understanding of that before you even build, right? Because that in and of itself is so much more valuable than putting in more of that energy that you would otherwise spend on talking with customers and users into building a product that ultimately people are going to be sort of so about. So yeah, I think that's always the killer advantage for startups in my mind is focus, and just focusing that initial launch off point, on a single problem if you can, and going from there.
Thank you so much, Taylor, for being on. And everybody should go to metal.ai to at least check it out and just see what they're working on. And yeah, this is a great episode, and you're doing really great work. I feel like it's going to be good for the venture capital community. It's going to be good for the PE community. It's going to be good for the entrepreneur community. So you're actually doing a really great thing, like fostering the community with what you're building.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, with that, Taylor, thank you so much again.
Likewise. Thanks so much, guys. It's a lot of fun. Really appreciate it.